Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, June 18th, day 621 of the war. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. Hi, Haviv. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda. Good to be here.
Always a pleasure speaking with you. The Israel-Iran war continues with fewer missile barrages each night from Iran, even as the supreme leader claims that the battle has just begun. Israel continues to find innovative ways to use its technology in this ongoing war, and Haviv will explain some of them. While the United States has so far sat out from the attacks on Iran, at least until recording time, Germany's leader seems to be egging Trump on to join the fray. And we also need to wonder what lessons are being learned by Putin, Russia's leader, as Israel seems to be showing up all of its technology in Iran. All of this and more when we're back.
The law basically assumes that the enemy force you are fighting may not care about your civilians, but it certainly cares about its own civilians. What do we do in a reality where you're dealing with an enemy that the suffering of their civilian population is inherent to their war strategy? Now, that doesn't absolve us of our obligations. Hamas's inhumanity does not absolve us of the obligation for humanity. But the context that it creates, I think, is critical to the conversation, and it's very lacking.
I agree, but when democracies fight back against terror groups, they have to fight on two fronts. They have to both fight on the terms that have been laid out by the terror group, and the second thing you have to fight back is by preserving the norms of a democracy. We're forced to ask these moral questions about what we are and what we do, but based on an enemy that is not playing by the rules. But that's what we decide to be a part of by being the family of nations. And as Jews, we say, like every morning in our prayers, we say, "Anachnu amcha b'nei britecha." We choose to be the people of God's covenant, meaning we tie ourselves to an aspiration of justice and righteousness.
I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. Haviv, let's start with the idea of how Israel is reshaping what it means to go to war, reshaping what it means to use the technology at hand. And I will quote out to you your friend, Colonel John Spencer, a military expert, in an op-ed that he recently wrote. He said, Israel didn't just strike Iran, it disarmed, disoriented, and destabilized a much larger adversary before the war had even begun in earnest. So, Haviv, let's talk about this idea of how Israel has tweaked some tech, including its aerial missile capabilities, specifically its standoff munitions, as our military reporter Emmanuel Fabian just told me they are called. So tell us about how Israel has done a little startup nation on military tech.
It's been absolutely astonishing. That stuff is like the shining jewel of this military. The long story short is Israel has rewritten the war manuals of all modern armies and all modern wars. And it's not alone. What Ukraine did with the truck drone attack, where it snuck drones through these trucks into Russia at a mass scale, and then from within Russia, sometimes very deep within Russia, attacked the strategic bomber fleet of Russia, is the kind of warfare that is going to be the future of warfare. What the Israelis have done was they have these problems, and they've went and solved these problems, and they've done them at a level of deep organizational integration and technological innovation. So, for example, Israel has an enemy that is, 2,000 kilometers away. Iran is vast, so some parts of it are closer, some parts farther, but let's say 2,000 kilometers away. It doesn't have a plane that can fly 2,000 kilometers. That is its range with its fuel capacity. And so what it has done was, first of all, obviously refueling over the skies of Syria. We've seen footage from ordinary Syrians who catch an Israeli plane refueling with an Israeli tanker plane, refueling plane in the skies of Syria. But another thing that it has done was in the very first day, and we've seen this also back in the airstrikes back in November, was that it fired from far away. It sent, I think it was F-15s over the skies of Iraq. They have their payload of missiles, and they launched missiles hundreds of kilometers. Now, these are not missiles that are supposed to go hundreds of kilometers. So how did they increase the distance of missiles with an engine that are supposed to go forward and hit the target? By making them go ballistic. By making them go ballistic means they go up so that they then have much more distance because of the long path down, right? So ballistic missiles have an enormous amount of distance using that ballistic arc of gravity. These jets fire these missiles, and the missiles then turn up. They gain height, and then they basically glide down into the target hundreds of kilometers away. And then there's a huge problem of targeting. It's hard to target a gliding missile, a controlled falling missile. And the Israelis have solved that. They had a whole effort to make sure that they could turn a gliding ballistic missile launched from a plane. So not this enormous, 1.5-ton warhead kind of ballistic missile that is the classic understanding of what a ballistic missile is. They have been capable. They have retrofitted the F-35s to carry missiles on the wings, something an F-35 is not supposed to do, according to the American manufacturer, so to speak. Not so to speak, according to the American manufacturer. And they've done just, these thing after thing. And look, I just want to clarify, I'm not an expert on this. We've been reading the experts on this, and it's been really kind of an astonishing revelation. The innovations again and again and again in how the military, how the Air Force, with planes that are not supposed to operate over Iran, are freely, consistently, comfortably, just very competently, just capable of operating over Iran. Israel has demonstrated, there's a huge debate among many, many armies, including, by the way, the IDF over the last 10 years, about the nature of the new kind of war. Are we shifting to missiles and drones? Missiles and drones are faster. Missiles and drones are less expensive. They can cause the same kind of damage as a manned air force. Maybe manned air forces are a thing of the past. And that's something that is an active discussion in the militaries of the present day. And what the Israelis just demonstrated is that missiles and drones are very much the future of war. The Mossad building drones in Iranian soil and then deploying them is just a more spectacular version of the Ukrainian trucks drone attack. And that is going to be in the war in the future. But when you integrate that deeply into the Air Force, and you have these planes capable of being platforms for ballistic missiles hundreds of kilometers past Israeli territory, in a way that Iran can only launch from its territory. And that also means that Iran's launchers are very, very vulnerable, right? There's every night a hunt by the Israeli Air Force over the skies of Iran for a launcher. As soon as that launcher launches, in many cases, they can see it and then they tackle it. And so Iran has this huge bottleneck of launchers. It has, I don't know how much it's launched, but they talked about between 1,000 and 3,000 ballistic missiles that could hit Israel. There are different estimates, but it doesn't have 1,000 launchers. So it's losing launchers. It's lost, the army said yesterday, I think a quarter or a third of its launchers, and that's the bottleneck. It can only launch a small volley at a time. So if you can make the plane the launcher of the ballistic missile, you've fundamentally changed the game. And the integration with Mossad. Dedi Barnea planned those first days, planned that long arc. Shalom Yerushalmi in our sister site, Zman Yisrael, has written about this in Hebrew, and I imagine it'll be translated into the English Times of Israel pretty soon. Dedi Barnea, the head of the Mossad, has been engaged intensively in not just building out the Mossad infrastructure on the ground in Iran, that we've seen the scale of how much it has penetrated the IRGC Air Force High Command, never mind, just finding facilities that need to be bombed because they're part of the weapons program or the missile program. But he did something almost more amazing than that, which is take all the Mossad's vast capabilities and integrate them so deeply with the Israeli Air Force's capabilities that they functionally operate as a single body. And they're not a single body. They are two very separate, very egotistical, vast bureaucracies. And for the purposes of the war in Iran, they are functioning as a single fist. And so many lessons of war are being rewritten right now by the Israelis because they saw these problems and they decided to have the capabilities in Iran that they had in Lebanon. Close by, near, much, much weaker enemy, And they said, nope, we're going to be able to do that in Iran. What would it take? And then they went and did it. It's an astonishing thing.
I think you're so right that the key is this integration, or one of the keys at least. And, as you're speaking, I keep wondering how the attacks on the Houthis have shaped how we're acting in Iran. And it appears to me that this integration factor, the integration with the Mossad, is part of the main difference. Of course, Yemen itself is thousands of kilometers away. And so it's the same challenges in the technical side of the refueling and to make these munitions into ballistic missiles, et cetera, et cetera. But it appears to me that because Iran has been, of course, the major enemy of the Jewish state for, decades, this information and the ability to integrate the Mossad intelligence and the people on the ground working for the Mossad has been such a game changer here.
And you'd think the Iranians would have noticed. What's incredible is every single capability we're seeing was telegraphed ahead of time by the Israelis. They showed it somewhere. And nobody in Iran is in charge of, it's funny, nobody in Iran is in charge of paying careful attention to the Israelis. I know that's a strange thing to say. Iran has decided, for purely ideological reasons, not for state interests, not for any real reason that anyone other than people sort of locked into their religious vision would understand, has decided that the destruction of Israel is their supreme goal, at least until it's achieved, and then they have bigger supreme goals. And the Israelis showed that they could bomb 2,000 kilometers away in Yemen, farther than many of the targets in Iran, and that they could do it easily, and that they could do it without any Iranian intelligence being able to pick it up, without Saudis noticing as they fly past the Saudi Arabia most of the way. They showed that they could do it with boats, with missile ships. They showed that they could do it at will. This distance was something the Israelis in Yemen showed was anytime they wanted. I mean, the big joke in Israel now is, what do you do in the 2-hour flight? There's no Wi-Fi on the plane. Like these poor pilots, and there's all these memes and there's all these funny videos of pilots sitting in their cockpits and just, playing checkers and things like that. It's a very boring flight. And then, it's like, it's so easy now for the Air Force to operate at 2,000 kilometers remove for a country the size of Austria. What are we talking about, right? And Iran didn't ever say, wait a second, right? We showed a penetration of Hezbollah. We took out Fuad Shukr, the chief of staff of Hezbollah. And then we took out Nasrallah. But weeks divided those two events. And during those weeks, we were systematically eliminating the Hezbollah leadership. Independently of the huge pager operation, there was an assassination operation. And nothing they did could hide from the Israelis. The penetration the Israelis had of Hezbollah, seeing those people moving around at the top levels of Hezbollah, when all those people have done for 25 years is try and hide from Israeli intelligence. Nothing they moved. So the Mossad showed what it could do when it has, 5 years to prepare and a deep focus on the place, and in contrast, of course, to the Shabak in Gaza, where it saw nothing. And the Air Force showed what it could do. And the Iranians never put two and two together and said, wait a second, what if they're on the ground here? They didn't look at Ukraine and say, if the Ukrainians can pull that drone attack off, every single Ukrainian capability, the Israelis have fivefold in terms of tech. So what are the Israelis planning? They never did that basic step. And the future of warfare belongs to intelligence. It's not a drone missile thing. It's not the platform. It's not the weapon. It's how you use it. And this is a fundamental truth. The Roman Empire, all of its conquests, all of its vast victories over a millennium were with the exact same tech that everyone else had. Nobody had a different tech. There were swords, there were horses, there were bows and arrows. That was it. But they had organization and they had coordination. The modern armies, what do they call it? Tasachin, Togilei Seder in Hebrew. It's the marches, right? The march and pivot and all these exercises in disciplined marching together in uniform lockstep. That was born in the Roman Empire when the legions trained to move in disciplined fashion with a consistent defensive line through a battlefield of swords, spears, and bows and arrows. And that organizational difference built the Roman Empire. And so organizational differences are the secret, deep truth of this Israeli success. I mean, you should have the missiles and planes and all that, but once you've got them, you can still screw everything up like Russia or Iran if you don't have the organization.
Okay, let's go to a short break and then discuss how Russia is screwing everything up.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. So, Haviv, Russia has been a key player in the region for decades, of course, choosing different sides and different opportunities. And right now it's taken, in the past, 20 plus odd months, taken quite a hit, especially once the regime in Syria was exchanged. But it has been deeply embedded in Iran, including supplying so much of its tech, perhaps all of its tech. And all of a sudden, it's seeing that maybe what it has supplied is not doing the right job. So where do you see Russia in all of this that's playing out before our eyes right now?
The Israeli war in Iran is a profound setback for Russia in two ways. And these are things we've seen. I mean, this is stuff I've been I'm not the intelligence analyst or the defense analyst.
So you only analyze seniors? Is that what we're saying?
I am a senior analyst. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, or senior analyst. I think it was back in in September, in the killing of Hania in Tehran. This was a profoundly humiliating assassination. Ismail Hania, the head of Hamas, is in the guest house of the Supreme Leader in Tehran as a special guest of the Supreme Leader for the inauguration of the Iranian president. And I believe the last thing I read was that his toilet exploded. I believe that's now the consensus. At the time, we didn't know if his toilet exploded or if there was a missile shot from nearby or whatever. And the Kremlin put out a public press release after that event that was an astonishing press release in which Vladimir Putin urged the supreme leader of Iran in his response, in his retaliation, because Khamenei really went crazy and he declared publicly that there'll be a horrific retaliation, which really frustrated the Revolutionary Guards because they didn't want a tit for tat where Israel would, have supremacy in the air over Iran, which is what ended up happening in November. But Putin put out a statement that said, when you attack, don't hit Israeli civilians. Now, that's an extraordinary concern for the lives of Israeli civilians on the part of the Russian dictator. It really warmed the cockles of our old broken hearts.
Well, there are about a million Russian speakers here in Israel, so maybe it has.
There are, but Kiev is on fire even as we speak from mass Russian missile attacks targeting civilians. He thinks of them as leverage. I don't think he thinks of them as people he has to, protect in this world, especially prevent his allies from retaliating because there's Russian speakers in this country. And by the way, many of those Russian speakers are from Ukraine, right? So they don't identify with Russia. But I think that what was happening was much simpler than that. Israel had drawn a red line at civilian deaths. So people don't remember, but the first Israeli strike in Yemen didn't come after the first ballistic missile attack from Yemen. There were 120 ballistic missile attacks and drone attacks from Yemen, and the Israeli response strike came after I think it was the 121st Yemeni strike, hit an apartment in Tel Aviv and killed an Israeli citizen. And that's when the Israeli Air Force picked itself up and flew 2,000 kilometers and bombed one of the main important ports of the Houthis. And when did it go after Fuad Shukr, the chief of staff of Hezbollah? When did that long arc of assassinations? Well, I think the whole thing lasted a month front to back. But when did that begin? When the 12 kids were killed by a Hezbollah shelling on the Golan Heights of a soccer field. And so the Israelis drew the line. They drew a line at civilian deaths. And what Putin was saying to Khamenei is, please don't incur the kind of Israeli response when the Israelis go nuts because you killed them a civilian. And why? Because Iran builds his drones for the Ukraine war. And why? Because he supplies Iran its air defenses. Iran is also a buyer, not just a seller. He needs Iran. He doesn't have 10 million different customers, right? He needs Iran, and he needs it as a supplier urgently, and he also needs it as a buyer and as a demonstration space for his tech. Russia is still one of the top 3 defense exporters in the world. And then the Israelis demonstrated from that moment on that actually all the Russian tech in Iran is useless against Israeli tech, which I should say means American tech, in some places upgraded in some significant ways by the Israelis, but nevertheless fundamentally American tech. And that whole demonstration space has done a few things for Putin. It's shown him that there's a huge gap in capability. I think everyone knows it, but you're seeing it on the ground, right? In Paris, this was already talked about on this podcast, but in Paris, there's the expo. The French blocked up the Israeli pavilions because they would not show, because the French have very, very powerful and strong morals, Israeli offensive weaponry. And the French, of course, are the world's second largest defense exporter. And in a lot of places, especially, for example, Europe, and even some of the classic, most reliable clients the French defense industry has, like Morocco, Israeli weapons are outperforming French weapons, and everybody wants them. And so this was not actually a moral thing. This was a trying to keep the Israelis out of the industry thing. And the joke running around Israeli social media, I believe, started by Ayelet Shaked, the former justice minister, whose husband, by the way, is not home because he's an Air Force pilot. The joke that has gone, I think, pretty viral in Israeli social media is our pavilions are closed in the Paris Expo, but we've moved our demonstrations to Tehran. So, please join us there to see what our weapons can do. And it's a joke that really reflects absolute truths. In other words, every single defense planner of Europe worried about Putin 10 years down the road, every single one is watching Iran and learning that the Israelis know something about integration that they can teach them, the tech itself, the electronic warfare, the need for intelligence. The need for intelligence in this new age. You want to have a Hezbollah that fires 200,000 rockets before you take it out in horrific, bloody, grueling war, or to do what Israel did with Hezbollah? The difference is intelligence. And so you have, for example, the biggest intelligence agency in the world is the CIA. But it doesn't invest in human intelligence anywhere near what the Mossad does. So maybe that's something the CIA needs to rethink. Signals intelligence is all well and good. In the end of the day, you need capabilities on the ground. The Israelis have demonstrated in all these different arenas of defense and war the absolute necessity for all these different capabilities that nobody else has really taken the time to build. And Putin, I think, is at the heart of it. If the West does not now begin to massively retool and invest in on-the-ground in Russia capabilities so that it can, for example, neutralize the nuclear threat before Putin has a chance to launch a missile, and that opens up radical nuke potentialities in terms of the battlefield, where you have also invested in this innovation driven by the kinds of things the Israelis have just shown is possible, then the West doesn't deserve to win the next war. I mean, the West still deserves to win the next war, but you know what I mean. Then these people are betraying the basic trust the public has given them and the vast funds that the public has given them to do their jobs. So the Israelis have just shown what everybody else could be doing if they took war much, much more seriously.
So there is one country that is taking everything that Israel is doing very seriously, and that is Germany. We've gone on quite a long time. So let's just briefly discuss this and how the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz expressed yesterday words of support for Israel's war against Iran. He said, "This is the dirty work Israel is doing for all of us. We are also victims of this regime. This mullah regime has brought death and destruction to the world." So obviously, Germany is not offering, right now at least, any kind of aerial support. It is, however, offering diplomatic support. And it appeared to me as well that Merz is pushing Trump to offer that aerial support that Israel actually needs to finish the job in Fordo, for example, this underground facility that Israel currently, it appears, does not have the capability to take out. So, Haviv, you see Germany is rising up and is offering support. What do you think about that?
I think Israel has a lot more friends than it did before. Because the question is no longer just how people feel about the images out of Gaza. And then the Israelis are frustrated because nobody has any images of Sudan, and it's all kind of a discourse of the morality of the Jews being allowed to have a state and all of that kind of debate, which, the suffering in Gaza is extremely real, and you and I and many others at the Times of Israel have talked about the frustration with some of the government's ridiculous policies that have led to some of it. Not all of it is necessary. A lot of it is necessary. It's the kind of war this is. It's a tragedy. Hamas had created this war to maximize that. So all of that debate has kind of been sidelined by the simple fact that the Israelis have now shown that there's something the world actually needs that they have. And maybe they don't actually need to buy it from the Israelis, but they need to learn it from the Israelis. And so Israel has a lot more friends now and a lot more admirers. And there's no, what's the old saying? There's no success like success, or something like that, right? Like succeed. And then that's the best kind of success there is. But it comes also 2 days after, Merz's comments come 2 days after Macron's, which were themselves extraordinary. Macron put out a statement on Monday. It was either Sunday or Monday, I believe it was Monday, in which he said, "I have just spoken with the Iranian president, Mossad Pezeshkian." And then he proceeded to relate what it was that he told him, which was kind of amazing. My first message was to demand the immediate release of our compatriots Cécile Kohler and Jacques Paris, who have been held hostage by the Iranian regime in unacceptable conditions for over 3 years. Iran just had this Israeli shock strike. Iran is reeling. Iran is talking to the French. The French have been consistently critical of Israel on every front for domestic political reasons, for international political reasons, and because they're really upset the Israelis are taking their defense contracts. And the first thing the French president says to him, it's a whole different conversation from what I think the Iranian president was hoping for, was, "Hey, you still got 2 of our people hostage, you bastard. Where are they?" And the second thing the French president said, this is the English language statement put out by Macron's office itself. "In light of the serious risk of destabilization across the region, I called for our diplomatic facilities and nationals in Iran and the wider region not to be targeted under any circumstances, and I urge the utmost restraint to avoid escalation," which I think is just an insult at this point to say to the Iranian president. And then he said, "Iran's nuclear program is a serious concern and must be resolved through negotiation." Still no Israel. It's still all on Iran. And then he said, and this is the real coup de grace that's really beautiful, "I therefore invited President Pezeshkian to return swiftly to the negotiating table to reach an agreement, the only viable path to de-escalation." The French president told the Iranian president, "You want this all to end? Come back to the negotiating table." I'm not going to the Israelis and telling them to stop. So the French and the Germans at least have the decency to say it out loud. The Israelis are fighting our fight. The French aren't saying it out loud, but they do see it and they do feel it and they are responding to it in their policy. And they're saying to the Iranians not, "How dare the Israelis?" What they're saying to the Iranians is, "Come to the table, this all goes away." They're using Israel as the bad cop for a strategy they themselves could never pull off as bad cops because they are, hobbits, Europeans, protected by America for generations and not actually capable of standing up and being seriously aggressive in their own rights. And so Israel is demonstrating what the foundational geopolitics of a safe, free world that doesn't depend on the vicissitudes of an American political system that is no longer dependable. So much is being rewritten over the skies of Iran right now.
Haviv, fascinating stuff. We've gone on way too long, so I hope we can speak again very soon about this and other matters.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.